This is the Data 698 final project for Zach Alexander and Misha Kollontai. The focus of our project was to project the financial viability of installing solar panels on a household. The reason that's a difficult estimation to make for homeowners is that solar panel claims rarely account for the amount of sunlight in a given area. For example, you may be quoted a 5 kilowatt system and told that this would be sufficient to power your home or to at least cover enough of your energy use to be financially viable. The problem with that is that a 5 kilowatt system generates 5 kilowatts of electricity during 1 hour of peak sunlight. Depending on where your home is geographically, you may receive anywhere from 3 to 4 peak hours of sunlight or 7 or 8 peak hours of sunlight at different parts of the year. These estimations and these claims of 5 kilowatt, 10 kilowatt systems don't account for the very large variance we see in amount of sunlight. Due to this, it's really difficult to gauge intuitively the financial outlook of installing panels on your home. Coupled with this problem is the fact that you must account for the amount you'll be paying for electricity anyway without the solar panels, and the fact that energy usage fluctuates significantly throughout the year. Finally, the initial cost of some of these panels can be very high, ranging from $10 to $25 or even higher $1,000. Our objectives then were to first calculate the yield of a potential solar panel system on a home. This would account for the roof size, which would limit the size of the panels you could get. It would account for the roof azimuth angle, the direction in which your panels would be facing, since that strongly influences the amount of sunlight they receive. And finally, it would account for the solar irradiance data collected from the NSRDB, which is the National Solar Radiation Database. Our second part of the project was to estimate the energy use of a household. This was going to use the average information for the area, then account for the home square footage, the year of construction, and the number of household members that lived within said home, since all of these factors contribute to just how much energy is used. Finally, these two parts would be combined into a long-term projection, and in our case, focused on Albany, New York, in order to limit the number of variables involved, in order to be able to more accurately assume variables like the price of electricity, the average use, and focus a little more specifically on the addresses involved. The first part of our project was calculating the panel yield. This was done using the following equation that accounted for the panel area, the efficiency of the panels, the amount of solar radiation, something called the performance ratio, and finally the loss factor due to the azimuth angle, as indicated above. The first part, the panel area, we decided to collect this information by scraping Google's Project Sunroof. Google's Project Sunroof uses Google Maps to map out roof areas and then estimates solar panel areas that could be viable for this home. What we did is we took the input address and then scraped Project Sunroof to collect the number that is available for solar panels as seen in this screenshot. For the efficiency, you can see here that the efficiency of solar panels ranges anywhere from 15 to 20%, with some of the most efficient panels on the market reaching 22 or slightly higher. In order to cover all of this, since you would be offered a more efficient panel if, for example, you had a very small footprint and wanted to generate more electricity, you'd need the same area solar panels to generate more energy. The way to do this would be a more efficient panel, which obviously would go hand in hand with a much higher initial investment. In order to kind of cover our bases, we assumed two values here, somewhat extreme values. We assumed 15% and 19% and ran our simulation for both options. The solar radiance data, which is kind of at the heart of this entire project, is driving a lot of how much energy solar panels get and why certain areas make a lot more sense for installing solar panels than others. As you can see on this map of the United States from the NSRDB, the southwestern states experience much more sunlight on average throughout the year. In these areas, any panels you install are very likely to cover, or at least come close to covering, the energy use that you have throughout the year. Areas in the northeast, which is the region we focused on, don't experience as much sunlight, and so the cost-benefit analysis is a little more complicated, with a 5 kilowatt system really not getting that many hours of peak sunlight throughout the day. This table here shows some of the data used in our calculations from the NSRDB. For Albany, New York specifically, which is the area we were looking at, this table shows the average and standard deviation for every single day of the year. So on the left you can see 0 to 364, that's 365 days a year broken down by month, and every day of that month we have data ranging back to 1998. Based on all of these pieces of data, we calculated the mean, the standard deviation, and we're able to put together a normal distribution for every day of the year. Using that, we could then, when running our projection, for every single day of our simulation, just pull a number from the normal distribution and assume that much sunlight. The performance ratio used in our calculation accounts for various sources of loss in the system. So this could be a loss due to the inverter, due to temperature fluctuations within the system, or simply low temperatures outside. Losses within the cables, losses due to shading, which any good contractor would probably account for. They'd either suggest cutting down any trees causing shading, they'd offer to tilt the panels in a way that would offer the most amount of sunlight, things like that. The performance ratio also accounts for things like losses at weak radiation, losses due to dust and snow, which is a large reason why cleaning your panels and keeping them free of any debris or dust or anything that could block sunlight is critical for maximizing your yield. Finally, the impact of the azimuth angle. We took data from a study performed in Arizona to generate this diagram here. Numbers were collected for various azimuth angles ranging from 0, which is due south, to due north. And we could see here that a 4th degree polynomial very nicely matched the trend in these numbers. Since the study was conducted in Arizona, we needed to find data for Albany, New York, which we found at the source at the bottom right here, which unfortunately didn't range as widely in the azimuth angle. But since we knew from the Arizona data that the 4th degree polynomial matched these numbers very nicely, we were able to graph this here based on the numbers we did have, and then generate an equation that was used for the loss function. The household energy use was calculated by taking the average usage in Albany, New York, collected from a website that I'll speak about later, and then various ratios were applied to this. There's a ratio based on the home area in square feet, a ratio based on the year of the home construction, and a ratio based on how many members live in said home. This graph shows the average usage for Albany, New York. This was what we used as a baseline. This shows, on a monthly basis, the average usage for a home in Albany, New York. It also compares it to the national average and New York State as a whole. We would take these numbers for each month and then apply ratios calculated based on various specifications we took off the home. So this shows a table for the year built and has separate bins for when the home was built, and shows numbers for what average per household numbers you have for each of the bins. By calculating a ratio of those numbers compared to the number associated with all of the homes, we were able to create these ratios on the right that showed that, for example, a home built between 1970 and 1979 uses about 89% of the average amount of energy that homes use. by calculating separate ratios for the year built, the square foot area of the home, and the number of household members, we were able to adjust and shift the average number of the usage to something that we estimated as the use for the home in question. We then provided the user with an opportunity to adjust that number to more closely match what they see in practice. Finally, all of these pieces were brought together. We accounted for the price of electricity in Albany, New York, which on average is about 11.74 cents per kilowatt. We accounted for about a 2% yearly increase, which, even though price changes aren't linear year over year, on average that seems to be the projected shift in pricing. So we projected all of this 15 years into the future. We calculated based on that estimated energy use profile that we explained above, how much you're likely to spend over the next 15 years. That's the red line here. And then we calculated a simulation that took that normal distribution of solar radiance and then ran through the equation to calculate how much energy your panel system would generate. And we accounted for two types of panels, a panel with an efficiency of 15% and a panel with an efficiency of 19%. Then we graphed this assuming both a fairly low initial investment at $12,000 and then a fairly high initial investment of $20,000. The idea here being that any real system that you end up installing will fall somewhere within that range. So this likely break-even range highlighted in this graph shows that if you have the least expensive initial cost coupled with a high efficiency, that you would probably break even somewhere around 7 years after investing. For the much higher investment cost at $20,000 with a low efficiency system, you'd actually be expected to break even at closer to 13 or 14 years. So the idea behind this project is to start by giving this wide range and then being able to whittle down and get more specifics based on your system. We then took all of these calculations and put it together into an interactive system that Zach will speak about next. Thank you.
Thanks, Misha. And now, as he mentioned, I'm going to go into the application that we built that takes these calculations and pulls it all together into an interactive application that we built using a front-end system in Angular, which is a JavaScript framework, and primarily the code was written in TypeScript, and it's connected to a back-end application that was written solely in Python using Flask to generate an API that interacts with the front-end system in Angular, and then also interacts with a PostgreSQL database that we host on Heroku. So the front-end system is deployed fully in Google Firebase, and the back-end system is deployed fully in Heroku, including the interactivity with the Postgres database. So for our solar calculator, a lot of it was, again, inspired by Google Project Sunroof and others that we found online, but we really did want to kind of try to provide a calculator that was interactive for potential consumers. And so on page load here, it's a very basic form, but mainly just asking for a user's address. And before we enter an address, I did want to kind of say that this application is specific to those located in and around the Albany, New York area. So we actually, because of our calculations and estimates, we wanted to kind of scale them specifically for a specific area. We picked Albany, New York. So when you type in an address here, the bounding of the search query here is actually going to be 0.1 degrees in either direction from directly center latitude and longitude of Albany, New York. So if we just type in an address as an example here, we can see that only really Albany specific and those around the Albany area are going to show up. So we'll pick an address here, and then after that we're going to hit Let's Get Started. Once you hit that button, it's actually going to do the data scraping that Misha had mentioned before. So we're actually going to be scraping data from Google's Project Sunroof and Realtor.com and a few different places. And we'll see here that after it actually scrapes this data, it actually pulls it in and shows to the user what it has found. And all that scraping, again, is done in Python, fed to our Flask API, and then interacts with our Postgres SQL database all during that moment where we hit that button. And then here we can see, right, from realtor.com, for this specific address that we entered in here, it found that, the square footage that was listed for that address was 1,752 feet. It gives the user an option to either click yes, that seems accurate to them, or no, if for instance, somebody added, square footage to their house. It gives them an option to really update that value if you want. But we'll say yes and next for now. And then similarly, it actually takes data from realtor.com for the year that the home was built, which will factor into our calculations as well, which I'll go into in a bit. Similar to above, gives you an option to either click yes or no. No, you would just update the form with the value that is correct for you. Yes, if it seems right to me, so I'll click yes and next. This next value is to really get the number of members of household that live at this address here. Obviously, we can't really scrape that from anywhere, so we're going to rely on the user to input that data. But we will use this, again, for our energy usage calculation that Misha went into a lot of detail on before. Let's say we have 4 members in the household. We'll click next. This next step actually does a lot of data scraping from Google Project Sunroof. So, whereas before the first 2 form fields were from realtor.com, we also scrape data simultaneously from Google's Project Sunroof, where as Misha mentioned in his screenshot that he had in the presentation before, we scraped the value of the total square footage that was available for solar panels for this specific address and location. And although that was the estimate given by Google's Project Sunroof, we realistically thought that consumers are actually going to be putting solar panels on the area of their roof that is going to be most advantageous for them and will yield the best results for their solar system. And so we decided to actually cut that value that we scrape in half. Say for instance you have something that is double this size, about 1,200 square feet. But half of that roof is actually on the north-facing side of things. The consumer is really going to be putting their solar panels mainly on the south side of the roof, so we're going to have that estimate be around half of that square footage. Now, if that estimate doesn't seem right to you, we actually do provide the option here to draw it yourself, which is a really cool functionality that I'll go into in a second. But so we scrape that value that I showed before, and then we also scrape the image from Google Project Sunroof of the person's or the user's particular roof that they've added. So this is the actual roof image using the 3D modeling that Google Project Sunroof has identified as the sunny and shady parts of the particular roof. So it provides the user an idea of where it would be most advantageous for them to place solar panels. So it gives you a lot of a rundown of where that is. And obviously we want to be putting solar panels in places that are these bright yellow areas if possible, because that'll generate the highest yields. And so after the user gets that information here, there's a set of instructions for using our interactive drawing tool. So if you get stuck, you can actually go in and see a video of how to utilize the tool. We'll say, okay, I got it for now, and then we're going to start drawing. So, I noticed that this roof gets a lot of sun on this part of the roof here. Let's say that we're going to use this portion to install solar panels. It's more south-facing than the north-facing part of the roof there too, so that might be better. We'll hit define the panel area, and it computes the area for you. So if that looks right to you, you can confirm the square footage. You can redraw if you'd like. We'll confirm for now. And then similarly, the last step in this process for the inputs is to figure out the azimuth angle and the orientation of your solar panels that would be situated on your roof. So similar before, we have instructions for if you get stuck, but we'll hit draw, and really we're going to figure out the azimuth angle for where you would be placing your solar panels, and doing so to get this angle in relation to due south, right? So we're going to find that orientation, and this is the degree from due south and the angle that we're looking for here to really kind of factor into our calculations. And before I hit confirm orientation, I just wanted to quickly elaborate that this is made possible by Google's JavaScript API. Given that this front-end application is written purely in JavaScript and TypeScript, we were given the ability to really build out this function. And then also on top of that code, we were able to code in this interactive drawing tool through a library that's also in JavaScript itself. So it's a really neat feature, and hopefully it will provide more insight for users to be able to get a better sense of where best to put solar panels for them, and gives them a lot of customability about where they would prefer to put them. So we'll click confirm orientation for now, and then here provides a summary of all the inputs that we had just gone through before. So it gives you one last opportunity to say, actually, the year that the house was built was in 1980 instead of 1972. You can update that, you can update the number of members, etc. But it also provides a good summary there. Once you are good with the estimates, you click, the estimates look good. And then from there, it's actually going to provide the summary table at the top that does a quick calculation based on the ratios that Misha talked about for energy usage. So it takes into consideration the total square footage of the house that was entered, the number of members, and the year that the house was built. Calculates it via ratio, the average monthly energy bill based on Albany costs and average costs that we've kind of factored in. So it's a neat kind of feature here to kind of provide that estimate. And again, it gives the users an opportunity to really adjust that if that estimation seems pretty off to them, and say actually our energy bill is about 180. You can actually make that edit right there before we run the estimation model, and similar with these inputs here. So given that, we're going to run the cost estimation model, and what's going to happen is it's going to load the visualizations to allow the user to interact with them and really kind of see a cost projection and profile for their specific address, which is pretty cool to see. All of these visualizations were created in D3.js and all have full interactivity here. As you can see, rollovers and tooltips and things like that too. And you can see here we've created 4 different scenarios for the specific address and any address that's placed in here, with 2 lower initial costs and then 2 higher initial costs, from 12,000 to 20,000. And then we have different panel efficiencies. Both of these are within ranges that we would find for a 5 kilowatt system, and also typical for just panel efficiency for solar panels in general in the Albany area. So you can cycle through these, and the figures are going to update, and the visuals will update accordingly. So you can get a sense of how these costs and these efficiencies would impact your breakdowns. Now we'll stick with this example for now. This visual here is a pretty straightforward graphic to show you, really based on the scenario that you put up here with the initial cost of $12,000 and your panel efficiency at the highest it could be in our scenarios, when you're going to likely break even if instead you just stuck with regular grid service. So as you can see, this purple line here is the thought that if you stuck with regular grid service to pay all of your and to gather all of your energy, we're going to take the Albany cost of that energy and project that out over a 15-year period of time. And we're going to assume about a 2% increase year over year, but we're going to see here you're just going to be constantly in the negative here, where you're going to be continuously paying into it. With solar, though, the advantage is that you're going to be able to contradict that and actually make up for that initial cost at some point where you're going to break even with what you would do if you stuck with regular grid service here. So it provides that area and that time, right? So we're seeing around 8 years where you kind of break even during this scenario. Now you can change that, right, with the different panel efficiencies and when that would be the case, but it gives the user an estimate there to look into. On the right-hand side here, we actually have a different snapshot of this figure on the left, but on the right here, we are looking at the deltas, right, between the regular grid service and the projected cost for different panel scenarios that you would install. So you can see here, it's basically just the shading between the 2 lines here, but projected out over a year-over-year estimate. So at the end of each year, what that's going to look like for you and how quickly you'd make up that that initial investment of, for this scenario, $12,000. You can see that matches very well with, transitioning to, the positive here at the 10-year mark, which is consistent with this graph here. But it gives another visual for that, and it actually kind of shows, how much you're going to save eventually after that break-even year, which is pretty interesting for the user. Now we're going to go down here, and you can actually see this example is an average monthly energy yield projection. So what we do with this visual here, more interactivity, but we're going to map out the high efficiency and low efficiency yields for the 15-year projection averaged out over each month, and then we take that and kind of map that on this y-axis here for projected yield in kilowatt hours. And then on the right-hand side, we actually have a cost that actually maps onto the kilowatt hours here, and then the yellow line is the monthly energy usage that we project based on the kilowatt hours that we've been able to kind of estimate based on your specific home square footage, the year that your home was built, and the number of household members that you entered in before. You can see that this changes over month, but you can get a sense of where you're going to kind of have a pretty average bill. And this break even, or this even line here that you pretty much see, really kind of matches up with the estimated average monthly bill there. So if we were to adjust the average monthly bill down to like $120, rerun the model, we're going to see that adjustment here, where it's going to be below some of the high efficiency and low efficiency yield outputs, on average. So pretty neat to kind of plan that out and see that as a potential consumer. And then this last kind of quick visualization here is really the crux and really the main portion of this solar calculator itself, is to really show when you're going to break even based on our projections. So with solar, you have this initial investment that you're going to have to pay into, and then really consumers want to know when they're going to be able to get all that money back from their initial investment. And so for this, you can see the range that we've developed for getting 100% of it back. And then we also, through research, have found that consumers are pretty much on the fence a lot of the time about this initial investment, and they want to know really kind of when they're going to get about 60% of that initial investment in solar panels back. And so this provides that range itself to provide more information. The reason why we break it out this way is to allow potential consumers to really think about their specific home situation. So if they're thinking of staying as homeowner of their address for a long period of time, this 8 to 13 year period might seem to make sense for them financially. However, if you're thinking of moving within the next 2 to 3 years, it may not make sense for you to install solar panels on your house and take that initial investment. However, studies have also shown that it can increase the value of any house that you have there. So to very quickly wrap up, I think one thing that we were really focused on when we were doing these calculations was how these really compared to some of the other solar calculators that are out there. And one that we used in particular that we mentioned a lot was Google Project Sunroof. So what we did was we actually took a list of addresses from our calculator tool and fed those into Google Project Sunroof just to check to see if our estimations for the projected years and when you'd likely break even matched up with their payback value, which was similar. And happily we found that their payback value fell right in the range of our estimates here most of the time. And so I think there were a few variables that we'll talk about in future work that we want to kind of focus on to hone in a little bit more for this calculator itself. But it was really nice to see that we did match up pretty well with a lot of the calculations that we had. And so in terms of future work, I really quickly mention that we would really like to kind of personalize this calculator even to energy use. So right now, as you can see from the data visualization that we just went through, there's a large fluctuation in how much energy is used by a particular consumer. This is an average fluctuation, right, from month to month. But it'd be really neat to actually give users an option to really adjust these values on the fly and see how that would really impact the overall calculations and cost projections, since that could really be something that could impact it as well. I think also too, as Misha mentioned up in the beginning, there's a lot of literature and a lot of companies will sell consumers a 5 kilowatt array, but sometimes that size is not really optimal for the size of house. So I think being able to scale the calculator out to meet certain volume of systems and be able to kind of use the solar calculator to really hone in on solar irradiance data for specific hours of the day that meet certain thresholds and peak sunlight, I think would be really interesting to kind of play into as well. As I mentioned before, I think the resale value of houses is something that we could even consider in the calculation. So, there were some estimates that we found in the literature that as much as 15% of the median home value could be increased by installing solar panels on someone's roof. So, again, in that situation where maybe some users are hesitant or potential consumers are hesitant about making the purchase because of the high installation costs, especially if they're going to be selling the house in a few years, it might actually be a good incentive to show them that they were actually going to really get that cost back when they sell the house. So something to really kind of factor into the calculator in the future. I think one thing that we didn't include that would be really great to include in the calculation itself would be panel tilt. We included azimuth angle, which again is the orientation from due south of the roof and where the solar panels would be oriented. But panel tilt can also play a large factor in the yields of solar panels themselves, and so that would be great to really suggest a panel tilt based on either scraping data or calculating things in general, and then to be able to kind of incorporate that into the calculator itself. Accounting for maintenance costs, we found in literature that maintenance costs actually started to and have been decreasing over time as solar panels have become more popular, in the consumer market. However, they are still there, and so being able to kind of map that into the costs and the projections would be helpful to give potential consumers a really good snapshot of what could be happening. So in the end, I hope you all enjoyed the presentation and our attempt to really provide a good, accurate solar calculator for residents of Albany. In the future, it'd be great to scale this out to a larger subset of the population and to be able to work on this further. If anybody has any questions or be interested in interacting with the calculator itself, we can send around the website link. It's fully live for anybody to enjoy, and we can take any questions now. Thank you.